Hello everybody, this is Nidhi from Canopas and you are listening to the Canopas podcast, the show that wants to make developers' life a little bit easier by providing directive guidance. Welcome to episode 8. In this episode, we are going to discuss about server-side rendering, that is SSR, and why it is needed and what are its advantages over client-side rendering and all. Today we have Jimmy as our guest who has experience in mobile applications as well web development on multiple platforms. So Jimmy, welcome to the show. Can you start with background of SSR?
Thanks Nidhi for having me on the show again. Let me start with the definition of server-side rendering. So server-side rendering is a term used when the HTML page is basically rendered on the server and then that fully ready page is sent to the client instead of a scenario where client will receive empty HTML file and JavaScript and it will execute that JavaScript in browser and will create that page on the client side. So that is server-side rendering.
So it's all about server, which is accepting our request from browser and processes it and then returns view file, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So why do we need server-side rendering while we are fine with client-side rendering?
So client-side rendering is really good, but it has a few drawbacks compared to SSR. The first one is the response time is basically a bit slow on the client-side rendering, and the reason is that the client will receive a few small chunks of JavaScript and CSS and that HTML page, and then it will basically create a full page from those chunks. And in case of SSR, it will receive full page instead of those chunks. So the first frame will be displayed much sooner with SSR compared to client-side rendering. And another advantage is that with client-side rendering, if you are making some asynchronous calls for loading data, then search engine bots like Google and Bing will not really see those data because it does not wait for asynchronous JavaScript execution. So they will just see a blank page and it will not index anything on that page. So basically server-side rendering provides good SEO support compared to client-side rendering.
But sometimes it happens that the client requests so many things from server. So does it compatible in that case, or when we can choose SSR over CSR? Can you have some insights on it?
In case of website where the traffic is huge, server-side rendering can basically add performance bottleneck on the server side because it will need to render that page for every user. So in that case, what you need to do is you need to use some effective caching strategy so that you don't need to render those pages for every request. Otherwise your CPU will get really hit, or you will have to use very huge machine to serve those requests.
I have also heard somewhere the term universal rendering. What is it? Can you give some insights about it?
Sure. So I have already explained SSR. Whenever you request a page, you will get a full HTML page instead of just empty page and JavaScript file. So in case of universal rendering, it's a combination of server-side rendering and client-side rendering. In case you have a website where you have multiple sections or page, what will happen with universal rendering is initial page is provided with server-side rendering, so you will receive a full page. But in case you navigate to other section, you will basically get that through client-side rendering. That website will only fetch the data that is needed for that particular page or section. So what happens is, after receiving the initial page, hydrating happens, where we have so many client-side rendering frameworks like Vue and React. What they will do is they will hydrate the content. That means they will compare the content they get from server, and they will also generate that content on client side, and they will match those content, and they will say they both are basically the same. And if they both are the same, then after that that website is basically renders using client side rendering. Whenever you click on a page, the full page is never loaded, and only that part is basically loaded. So user will also gets benefit of the client side rendering, and server side rendering benefits like SEO and time to first frame will be also available in this case. So that is basically universal rendering, a combination of SSR and CSR.
That's very informative. There is also one term SSG, that is static site generation. Can you spread some lights about how it differs from SSR?
Yeah, sure. So SSG is basically SSR done at the build time. So with SSG, you will need to run a node process which will generate a page at runtime. So that means you cannot host your site on some static file hosting service like S3 and then you can basically host the website. Compared to static site hosting, the server side render hosting can be expensive. So with SSG, what will happen is if you have a limited page and those pages are same for all the users, then SSG will render all the pages of the website at the build time, and then you will basically get static files that you can just host somewhere. And it's also very easy to scale as well, as there's no rendering happening at the runtime. So yeah, that is SSG.
So basically, when the pages are limited for a particular website, or the content is going to stay forever, or I can say that it is not changing quite rapidly, so in that case we can choose SSG, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. A really good example is documentation of library or framework or any static website.
So that explains SSR and SSG very well. If I want to implement SSR for my website, how can I get started?
So yeah, most of the client side render framework provide a tool to render those application on server side. So what you'll need to do is you will need to run a forever node process that will make use of that client side libraries SSR framework to load that page on the server and renders it, and then basically send that HTML back to the browser. So for example, if you are using Vue framework, then Vue framework has a tool called Vue SSR and that you can use in Node.js process to load that page on a server and then send that HTML back to the browser. And also most of the libraries have that tool, like React also has React SSR and stuff like that. And if you don't want to go into these details, then there are some libraries or frameworks that are basically written on top of this client-side library that does that by default, like Next.js for React and Nuxt.js for Vue. They provide universal rendering, server-side rendering, and static site generation support by default. So you don't really need to manage all these things. You can just turn a flag on and off to enable server-side rendering.
Alright, so as always, frameworks make our life easier. SSR is also doing the same, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
But that being said, every coin has two sides. SSR must have some drawbacks. Does it have?
Yeah, there are a few, and I have already mentioned some of them. Compared to client-side rendering, the hosting cost is huge. and also depending on the traffic that you get, it might be like a bit hard to manage server-side rendering compared to client-side rendering, where you will just get a few static files that you can host anywhere. And another thing is that server-side rendering can be a bit slow, as you need to render that page on the server and you need to wait for it and then provide that page to clients. So if you are not using effective caching strategy, then SSR might be a bit slow.
Thanks for the explanation, Jimmy. I hope our audience will have a bit more idea about how SSR exactly works and what are its advantages and in which scenario we can choose SSR over CSR. Thanks for listening to the Canopas podcast. Make sure to check the show notes to discover our informative materials related to this podcast. If you have any questions or are interested in further discussions, please feel free to reach out on our Twitter handle Canopas Software.